Loving God, may we enter into this space, letting go of our fears, taking off our masks, and being our authentic selves. Luminous God, be our guide and our guardian. Turn the dark nights of our lives into shimmering daylight and help us to rejoice freely. Abiding God, we rejoice in your presence and the hope that you bring. May we find comfort in your promises of love and life. Amen. Friends, may the peace of Christ be always with you. I'm sure most of you have heard the story of the Phantom of the Opera. And probably most of you have heard the story by watching Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical, which first premiered in 1986, which makes it just 1 year younger than me. No dig or anything intended. It's an incredible story, and the musical opens up on the Paris Opera House. It's in dilapidated condition. It's in the early part of the 20th century, and they're having an auction. They're selling off many of the props that the Opera House had used. First up is a papier-mâché music box with monkeys atop it. And a man bids and gets the music box. And then the auctioneer says that there is a chandelier. A chandelier which is sitting on the floor and was part of an infamous incident involving the Phantom of the Opera. And then this chandelier begins to rise up, and it begins to take its place of former prominence as we're transported back in time, and we're going back to a time when the Phantom had the run of the Paris Opera House. What is this? Sonny, are you doing this? What is this? Friends, look up there. Who is this? The fifth row from the front, Phantom, I know that in your opera house, box 5 was always left open, but this is a church and we don't have reserved seats here. Oh, thank you, Phantom. I'm grateful for this Phantom, the Phantom who runs our coffee cart every Sunday morning and always has wonderful costumes. And I'm grateful that he's decided not to haunt University Christian Church. The Phantom did haunt the Paris Opera House, though. And at the beginning of the play, we see that there have been 2 new owners of the Opera House. And they've made a fortune in the junk business, or scrap metal industry. And they've decided that perhaps the arts are a lucrative place to make some more money. And so they're taking a tour of the opera house, and they meet all the players, especially Carlotta, who is the prima donna of the opera. And she acts just as you might expect her to act, the prima donna. The Phantom is still in the house. And so they receive a note from the Phantom. And the note says that I expect my box number 5, to be left open, and I expect to continue collecting my salary. They're not thrilled about that. And they decide that they're not going to do that. And then there is a backdrop that falls and almost hits Carlotta. And she storms out saying that this has been happening for 3 years. What are they going to do? They have a sold-out house. Are they going to try and refund all the money? Well, the dance instructor says that there's a girl in the chorus, Christine Daae, who might be able to take her spot. And they say, a chorus girl? No way. But she stands up and she starts singing, and she sings beautifully. And so they decide to let her sing with some more persuasion later that evening, and it goes wonderfully well. And afterwards, they see the benefactor, a man named Raoul, who knew Christine as a child and wants to reconnect with her. He goes into her dressing room, and he tells her how glad he is to see her, and he wants to take her out to dinner. And so he calls for his carriage, and he leaves, and her door is mysteriously locked from the outside, and she's not able to go. You see, her singing instructor has some harsh rules. Her singing instructor, who she calls the angel of music. You see, when her father died, she's orphaned. Her father told her that there would be an angel of music who would teach her everything she needed to know about song. And for years, this disembodied voice, this angel of music, has been singing to her from the walls. And who is the angel of music? None other than the Phantom of the Opera, who has locked her in her room. And he's decided, now that they have had this triumphant success, that it's time for that voice to be given a face, or at least a partial one. And so he opens up her mirror, which is really a trap door, and asks her to come in. She takes his hand, and he leads her down into the tunnels, into the darkness. And there's this iconic scene where they're on this boat together, going to his lair. Then he sings a song, which Phil sang so wonderfully just a moment ago, The Music of the Night, where he encourages her to give in to the darkness, just as he has. And she catches her reflection in this mirror, and in her reflection, she sees a wedding dress, and she's overcome with emotion and faints. She wakes up to hear music coming from this papier-mâché music box with monkeys on it, and she sees the Phantom over at the organ, writing, composing. And she goes over and takes off his mask to see a disfigured face. And she's overcome, and he's initially very angry, and he begins singing this song about how he longs to be normal, and about how he desires for her to love him. She's moved by pity and gives him back his mask, and he takes her to the surface. And as time goes on, she begins to fall in love, not with the Phantom, but with Raoul, her childhood friend. And the Phantom gets increasingly jealous. You see, we're told a number of times that it's not his face that people fear, It is his soul, which is as distorted as his face. And it becomes clear that the phantom will go to any means necessary to make sure that his goals are accomplished. He will do whatever it takes, including murder and manipulation. Psalm 139 is a powerful psalm, a prayer, as Morris reminded us. A prayer that reminds us that we are always, absolutely always, loved by God. We are created by God, and we are loved by God, no matter what we do, no matter where we are. These are poignant words. God, you have searched me and known me. Where can I go to escape your spirit, God? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. He goes on to say, even the darkness is not dark to you. The darkness is like light to you. That no matter what it is that we're going through, no matter where it is that we are, that God has promised to be with us. Even if it's down in the tunnels beneath this opera house. And yet, the phantom has never known that love. You know, this story is similar in some ways to the ones we heard last week from Wicked, the story of Elphaba. But there's a pretty big difference. Elphaba, the witch, who got labeled as the wicked witch, had people in her life who cared about her, who loved her, and it kept her from ever really becoming wicked. The phantom has no one. We discover that he was a sideshow act and that people paid to see him. And it's only because the woman who became the dance instructor and took in Christine, only because when she was a teenager she saw him and freed him, that he was able to escape from the sideshow and able to find his place down in these cavernous tunnels. And yet he secludes himself from everyone. He doesn't know love. You know, I think a lot of times people miss the point of this psalm, that it's about God's love for us. Sometimes people get too caught up in that little last part, the part where it talks about people being woven together in the mother's womb. It's the psalmist's acknowledgement that God knows us beyond how we know ourselves. And yet, sometimes people want to use that phrase to make the psalmist into a 21st century geneticist. And they miss the point. They say that God is responsible for making people how they are, even when it causes suffering. So I'm thinking about this, especially after this week, as we've heard all of this in the news about the transgender community being targeted. And so sometimes people will use phrases like this, I knit you together in my mother's womb, to say things like, well, that means that a person ought to keep the sex that they're assigned at birth, because God knit them together in their mother's womb. But that's not what the psalmist is talking about. That would be a lot like saying that God caused physical disabilities in a mother's womb, that God caused mental disabilities that cause great suffering, that God caused disfiguration like that of the phantom, these kinds of things. And the psalmist isn't talking about that at all. The psalmist is talking about this poetic notion that God loves us no matter what it is that we encounter. No matter what adversity we face, not that God causes the adversity that we face, but that God promises to be with us at all times and through all things, no matter what it is that we're going through in our lives, no matter what the darkness of our lives is, that God has promised to be there in the midst of it. I've said this before and I'll say it again. God doesn't promise us much, but one thing that God does promise us is to be with us in all times and through all things. The phantom has never experienced that kind of love. Because one of the clearest ways that we come to know God's love for us is by loving others, by knowing that other people care about us. And so as the play progresses, the phantom manipulates his way into having his play, Don Juan Triumphant, prepared and performed. And in the midst of that play, the opera house is set on fire, and he assumes one of the roles and kidnaps Christine and takes her back to his lair. Raoul comes after them. He's captured by the phantom, and he's tied up. And the phantom gives Christine a choice. He says, either you leave and I kill Raoul, or you stay and I'll let him live. Of course, she loves Raoul. She can't stand to see him killed. And so she decides to stay. And she sings a song as she walks towards the phantom. And she says in the song, "May God give me the strength to let you know you are not alone." That's powerful. And then she gives him a kiss. And for the first time, the very first time, he recognizes that he is not alone. He gets moved by compassion for the first time because for once, someone has shown compassion towards him. May God give me the strength to let you know that you are not alone. And she thinks about what it is that's been going on in his life, why he might be acting the way it is. May God give me the strength to let you know you are not alone. And he lets them both go. And he disappears. Compassion is powerful. Presence is powerful. Knowing that God is with us and showing others that God is with them is incredibly powerful, because I think at the end of the day, one thing that we all want to know is that we're not alone and that we're loved. We're not alone and we are loved. So friends, hear these words. You are not alone. You are loved. May we share that message with all the world. May it be so. Amen.